Want to get started today, and I'm going to start with introductions. So first we have Kate Stevenson, and she is the Managing Director over our advisory practice, and BJ Cummings, who is Managing Director over our technology practice, and Leo Wee, who is Managing Director over our supply chain. So to get started, one of the questions that we had, and I was going to go ahead and take a poll, because of course in today's environment there's a lot around cost containment, and so I was going to launch a poll, and if you guys were interested in going ahead and voting on this and letting me know if you can't see or if you're having any issues. But what are some of the cost containment strategies that you are using within your company? Share our results. And so it looks like for everyone who voted, reducing external labor costs was across the board unanimous. So all participants have that result, and that's something we're seeing very common. And then contract negotiations is another big one, and supplier consolidation. All right, so thank you for participating. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn our first question over to Leo. And that question is, what are the prevailing cost containment strategies that you are hearing from operators? And so, Leo, could you take a stab at answering that?
Sure, thanks, Amy. And yeah, interesting on the survey results as well. That's pretty common. We'll touch on these things as they're pretty consistent as well. I think if anybody has been listening to any of the earnings calls that are been happening over the last few weeks, easily the big strategies are around eliminating D&C budgets and eliminating those altogether, or significantly reducing them until commodity prices recover, of course. Also shutting down uneconomic wells and adjusting headcounts to match current activity levels. So those are obviously the large ones that the operators are quickly doing to adjust to the market environment. But outside of those major activities, there seems to be a lot of heightened focus on rapidly reducing LOE and G&A costs. That's been discussed in the past, but because of the current environment, a lot of focus and continued focus on trying to manage that well. So I'm going to touch on those points specifically, and we'll start with LOE reduction. So as you saw in the survey results, some of the traditional strategies that are common out there that as we discussed to operators are going out for bid, reducing and consolidating suppliers, asking for immediate price reductions across the board. And yes, you can get some short-term results immediately, but I think some of the opportunity that you have there is, and the problem with that strategy is usually that's temporary, and I think everybody that goes through that strategy recognizes that's usually a temporary relief, but it's a quick action that's to be taken. But in this environment, I think operators are really trying to understand how do you sustain those results. And so we've been discussing with some of the operators, some initiatives that are a little bit more strategic in approach to drive down those costs, but also not just get the costs down, but with the goal of sustaining those results is fundamentally the goal. And so how do you get there? And so one of the things that you really have to understand is that spend at a granular level and get visibility to that spend, and understanding the cost drivers that may deliver those types of sustainable results. As an example, when you're really talking about LOE, typically saltwater disposal is your top spend category. And again, you can go back and ask, let's say it's external trucking companies to drive down their per barrel costs. But, and again, you can get those results, but as you start breaking that apart, you'll start realizing that sometimes those trucking companies are bundling their per barrel price with the disposal fees. And so breaking that up and seeing that with the spend data is important. But then really trying to understand the fundamental cost drivers. So we'll see sometimes that service providers aren't being as efficient as possible, where drivers are going well to well because they don't have a full load to take to the disposal sites. Sometimes those disposal sites are logistically also inefficient when you look at the cost of disposal and also the basically the distance taken from well site to those disposal sites. And then not necessarily leveraging SCADA information and production data through your SCADA systems, where you can get the volumes and have a timely visibility to those volumes so that you can put more planning into scheduling, get more efficient routes. And when you fundamentally change those dynamics and make a more efficient operation for the service providers, that typically will then drive down those costs in a more sustained manner. And that's not just externally. If you have your internal saltwater disposal operations, it goes with doing the same thing. So it's really managing it similarly there. But how do you continue to gain that visibility instead of just trying to understand it through looking at approving invoices? That is fundamentally one of the places you can really manage those costs. So leveraging current technologies that are out there, and again, this isn't rocket science, but it's important to manage it this way, is really managing your spend through the invoice approval process. And it has long-term benefits as well. So looking at things like electronic catalogs or price books for if you're using open invoice, so that you can then match your incoming invoices to negotiated pricing. And that's one way to get an understanding of variances, but also validating compliance to those prices. And if there are variances, of course, gives you the ability to reject it or at least manage to get visibility to those costs and variances. Then when you start expanding that process into the other systems that are related into the business process, like electronic field ticketing and contract modules, all those are systemic ways of getting more control of your costs. And those are going to be important to sustain that cost management overall, as specific to LOE as well. Not just LOE, but that obviously expands down to CapEx as well. Another cost containment strategy that we've been discussing with operators, this has really come up more and more, especially in this environment. It's really asset management, because asset management has been around for quite some time, and some operators haven't been focused on it as much because of the intense focus on D&C costs. But now in this environment, they're really looking at, how do I gain value with what I already own? And so getting visibility to what you have through those assets, defining those assets. So when I mean assets, typically that's surface equipment, facilities equipment, all the materials associated with that. But being able to understand what you have, having a system that helps manage that, and a business process that helps you to continue executing to it and maintaining that database is really pivotal and important for you to be able to execute and get the value out of those assets. But operators more and more are trying to avoid costs and unnecessary purchases by leveraging internally what they already have. But again, the bottom line is understanding what they have first, and so having to physically do an audit and inventory around that. And the other thing is that's associated with asset management, that in this current environment, as you're shutting down wells, is there's quite a bit of surplus assets out there now. And so there's opportunities now more than ever of liquidating some of those unnecessary or surplus assets and getting incremental value and cash flow to your company. The third area I'll touch on LOE reduction is that we've seen a lot of operators really moving to a model of managed by exception or managed by intention. Instead of the, again, traditional routes that that pumpers are following, they're really trying to leverage data and work order information to understand where they can focus their field resources. And then when you combine that information on your labor resources and be able to control that, combined with your service costs through invoices and asset management to avoid unnecessary costs on materials, those are three powerful levers that really help you manage your LOE overall. Just wanted to pause, see if there's any questions or around the LOE side before moving on to G&A. Okay, so on G&A, as I mentioned, the biggest mover that we've seen is really around headcount and adjusting to current activities. But obviously with COVID-19, we're all learning to work remotely, just like we're doing this roundtable in a virtual environment. We have seen operators really changing the way they're doing business and really considering, does a traditional office environment make sense, or should we shift our resources and budget to understanding how to maintain productivity and enabling a virtual work environment versus spending that money on the traditional office space expenses. And so I think we're going to see that not only be a reality now, but something that's going to continue as a trend. And more businesses are really fundamentally changing how they do business. So those investments, again, are starting to change into those technologies that enable that virtual work environment. And then lastly, what we have been discussing more frequently is something that's also been around for quite some time, which is managed service or outsourcing. And before, some of the executives we've been speaking to, a lot of the in-house capabilities were important for them to maintain in-house. But given the cyclical nature and how steep these curves have been, and fundamentally now this really unprecedented cycle, they're really looking at how to be more flexible with their G&A and be able to react quickly to manage their G&A. And we have to have critical functions still to execute to operations and the business, but not only outsourcing managed services around accounting, IT, supply chain on the back office side, we're also looking at some of the support functions or the operational functions as well. And so critical functions that, again, traditionally have been in-house are being considered to be able to look into a managed service or outsourcing model to rapidly and cost effectively ramp up and ramp down with the environment.
Thanks, Leo. Does anybody have any questions at all? And feel free, you can put them in the chat, or if anybody wants to speak up with a question. We all good? Everybody's got all the answers now, Leah?
I guess so.
This is Mike Mazzillo with Lewis Energy. Can you hear me?
It's quiet. We can hear you, but I think it's pretty quiet.
Okay, I just have a question. Have you seen operators collaborating, these tough times, maybe sharing SWD systems or other assets, partnering up to jointly reduce costs, or does everybody still want to kind of be a lone ranger?
So I think in certain plays, we've seen that there's a little bit more openness to sharing. But sometimes that's driven by the play they're in that it's necessary to collaborate. And that's not necessarily because of the current environment. But I do think that forums like this, and you can see the testimony of people attending something like this, where we want to learn and share amongst each other. And I know when I worked for operators, that was something that we really were trying to do a little bit more of. And clearly, when there's confidential information, we are not going to be discussing those types of topics. But being able to understand best practices and how we help each other be more efficient as an industry, overall that's a good thing. And we are starting to see a little bit more activity around that. But from a formal standpoint, I haven't necessarily personally seen that, but I'd be interested, anybody else in the audience, have they seen a little bit more collaboration and openness of sharing information given these times and trying to help each other in the industry out more?
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
This is Lance. This is Lance at Red Bluff, and that's been pretty active conversations up where we are. It's been going on for probably a better part of a year. My guess is that that's going to continue as we go forward. Things such as maybe you have 2 or 3 wells that you need to complete in the year, and kind of aggregating in your pressure pumping services to come together to fill out schedules and remove the spot process, capitalizing on kind of the dedicated crew concept. That's something that's been pretty active as far as conversations are going. There's been little outcome from it, but there's been willingness to do so. Obviously, those have a lot of variables that are associated with that would be need to be looked at, such as when your till dates are, or when production needs to come online and working together. But as far as from the DNC side, it's been a pretty active conversation from what I've been able to see.
Thanks, Lance. Really appreciate that. Yeah, and I agree. Again, I think some of that is depending on the play that you're in, that it drives the necessary discussion around helping each other out so that you can continue to execute to your program. In other areas, they maintain some highly competitive environment. But again, I have seen some cracks of opportunity where that's starting to open up a little bit more.
Great conversation. Are there any other questions or comments? No? Okay, I'm going to move on to our next question, and I'm going to start this one with a poll also. And this one talks more about what projects and technologies are we still moving forward with in this environment. So the question is, what current projects are still moving forward in the current environment? And feel free to click multiple answers on this one also.
And while we're waiting on that, Amy, I do have a comment on the previous one. I think with some of the newer additions of technology, especially around data sharing, it's going to make that more and more of a reality to securely share your data across customers and across companies. So I think with the advance of technology, you're also going to see additional doors open there as far as how people share data and how people manage that data internally.
Great comment, BJ. All right, looks like we're wrapping up on the polling. Anybody else need more time? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close out the poll and share the results. And so interesting on this one, seems like content management is one of the ones that is probably being put more on hold, but still moving forward with those data analytics, warehousing projects, master data management. So some of those key foundational data initiatives appear to still be moving forward. So that leads us into our next question, which is, what technology projects are still moving forward at our clients? And so I'm gonna turn that one over to Kate.
Sure, thanks, Amy. You know, like Leo said, operators are, of course, cutting budgets, and we all saw a collective pause in March and April on a lot of projects. Many of our clients finished those technology projects that were very high value and almost complete, but some put a pause on those that were just beginning until the June-July timeframe. We actually went live with 2 system implementations remotely this past month, so very proud of that, and it was definitely brought some interesting lessons learned. But as companies are moving into opening and going back to the office, they're evaluating what was approved for the second half, and they're looking at their portfolio of projects and trying to focus in on those technology projects and business projects that support a rapid reduction of LOE and G&A. And then priority second would be more of those long-term reductions. So the projects that were at high cost but didn't provide that immediate business value, for example, upgrades, technology upgrades, some new implementations that hadn't started yet, are being delayed, either to later part of second half or into 2021. But across our clients, what we have found is that those projects that support enabling a remote workforce, optimizing those supply chain and asset inventories, automating those cost control processes, and rationalizing their technology are still moving forward within the next 3 months. So talking about enabling the workforce, so this has definitely been on the forefront. So, you know, like Leo said, there are a lot of opportunities to reduce G&A using a remote workforce. In addition, companies are also looking more and more at those fractionalized resources within a managed services contract. And as a result, the new norm is remote teams. So our clients are starting to look at their own digital platforms and if they need to optimize those to ensure that collaboration, but also to ensure that data is easily accessible and organized. I noticed on the polling that content management wasn't as big of an area of moving forward, but we've had a couple of our clients talk about, hey, if we go remote, how are we going to make those documents, especially related to critical wells, accessible and available for our workforce if they're not at the office? So we've had some clients talk about that, but they're also still kind of delaying the immediate shift to those projects. We actually had one client that say, you know, hey, we're going to try to look at going remote, but now I understand how important technology and access to information is going to be with that remote workforce. On the supply chain front, you know, like Leo mentioned, we've seen more and more companies streamline their asset inventories. So in the past, you know, a lot of that surface data, asset data wasn't really in a system. A lot of our clients keep it in Excel spreadsheets. A lot of our clients don't keep it up to date. So we've seen a refocus of that. We've seen some clients initiate projects within the last month to go out and actually do an inventory on their field assets, push those into a system, and be able to evaluate that data. So, and then they're focusing their budget more on a long-term projects to keep that evergreen and be able to continually have visibility into those opportunities, as well as do material transfers for better cost control. So we're seeing a refocus around how do we support that asset management. We are also seeing a lot of interest in process automation. So process automation, and you'll hear this term a lot, is called RPAs, so robotic process automation. Those are really good quick wins. They're easy to develop, low cost to develop, and they have a lot of high value. As an example, we're just about to wrap up a project at a Permian operator where we are saving them approximately $1 million a year just based on the efficiencies that we were able to gain within their invoicing process, as well as giving them better visibility into their invoicing data as a result of it. So there's higher quality data and immediate cost savings of $1 million. So with a possible reduction in workforce that we're seeing, it's becoming more and more critical that automation is in place, and process automation with those RPAs is a great start because they're low cost and they're easy to implement with a lot of high value. You know, one of the questions that's later question that was submitted to us was around licensing costs, and BJ is going to touch on that a little bit more, but I am finding a lot of our companies are taking a step back before going into the second half to look at their project portfolio as well as look at their technology portfolio. They're looking to say, hey, can I deliver these same projects at a lower cost, maybe using fractionalized resources and services to deliver on those same projects, maybe not delivering all of it, but some of it or part of it. And also, are there software costs going into 2021? Can we do something now to replace those software costs in 2021 to help us with our future cost? As an example, one of our clients actually reduced a very large chunk of licensing costs by moving to newer technology around Azure Blob and SharePoint versus keeping their very expensive content management platform. And they were able to do it before their licensing costs were renewed. So now is the time to start looking at that technology and rationalizing it to see, hey, are there newer technologies out there that can replace what this software is doing at a lower cost long term? So as a recap, projects that we're seeing still move forward, like I said, the projects that were close to finished. The projects that are focused around immediate cost containment are moving forward immediately. And then companies are looking at the longer term cost saving projects for the second half. Amy?
That was great, Kate. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Any questions, comments? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move forward to our next question. And this one was submitted. And of course, my share screen's not wanting to work. see, let me try one more time. There we go. Are there significant software changes people are looking to make due to the direction of the commodities? Examples moving away, things like Microsoft, Adobe. What are we seeing in that space? And so I'm going to turn that one over to BJ.
Thanks, Amy. Short answer is yes. And back to Leo and Kate's comments, we are consistently seeing cost cutting across the whole oil and gas landscape. Everyone's looking for ways to do more with less. Looking at the micro level and using the examples that were mentioned in the question, such as moving from Microsoft to Google on a larger scale, or Adobe to Nitro on a smaller scale, you really have to look at the overall ROI. I think it would be a major mistake to just look at dollars when making those larger scale decisions. For example, Google may be a good alternative to Microsoft Office to limit cost and achieve good enough status, but you also have to take into account the burden on the business. The cost savings do come with some nuances. For example, there are issues with shared calendars, and users do not have the ability to transfer Excel formulas directly into Google spreadsheets. And everyone on this call probably has some amount of Excel solutions sitting on folks' desktops that will be impacted as well. There's also a set of sanctioned instances of Excel that are used as front ends for the data lakes, data warehouses, and queues. I think you also have to think that the last 3 months, everyone's dealt with a lot of change, and how this will impact them and how the organization manage that impact and the potential loss of productivity has to be a consideration as well. For the smaller changes like Adobe to Nitro, the learning curve and change may be less significant and have a lower risk to interrupt the business and their productivity. We would definitely encourage all our clients before they go rip and replace to evaluate reducing the current licensing cost, optimizing that access to the data, and to look at the long-term cost impact to the organization. As another example here that I'll throw in, third-party data is a huge cost for many of our customers. We're currently working with a number of our clients on options on how to reduce or eliminate that cost going forward as well by accessing that data directly from the state's websites and cleaning it up. Looking at the macro level, I think there are really 3 major technology trends that we need to be aware of that can reduce that short-term and long-term cost. At the center of this is really data, how it is captured, how it's used to make better decisions. Looking at Gartner's 2020 technology trends, I think the following show the most promise from a cost-cutting perspective. As Kate mentioned before, hyper-automation, so utilizing technology to automate those tasks like RPAs that once required human intervention, it is a huge opportunity out in the market right now. I'll also say that we can have a dramatic impact on reducing that cost as well by looking at enterprise integration. This can have a dramatic impact on the manual effort to maintain that data across systems, as well as downstream reporting and analytics that require that consistent high quality data. And back to Kate's point on the size of projects and what's moving forward, these projects are smaller with a higher, more clearly defined ROI. The second point here is really the democratization of technology, which really means providing people with easy access to technical or business expertise without the expensive and costly training that it requires most of the time. A lot of times we hear of this as citizen developers, but we are seeing companies utilize that low-code, no-code platforms such as Power Apps to capture and share information quickly. These platforms reduce the need for technical resources and the maintenance required for custom application development, ultimately reducing that cost and the time to value. In fact, one of our clients recently built out a Power App application to manage information centrally for routes. The third piece, and I think looking a little longer term here, is really cloud and SaaS. In these environments, the provider is responsible for all aspects of architecture, delivery, operations, governance, and updates. Done correctly, this reduces the cost associated with hardware, software, as well as the internal resources, which can be a major cost, or external resources to maintain these environments. As Kate mentioned before, and I think she can throw out some numbers, but we've seen a customer that drastically reduced their cost of storage for unstructured documents over $1 million a year by moving to Microsoft's blob storage. Kate, anything to add there?
No, just to add to everything that you said, based on the projects that we're seeing moving forward, as well as what BJ touched on and how to reduce cost, there's just a lot of technology out there right now, RPA, cloud, and so forth, that has that immediate ROI. You don't have to have these large technology projects anymore. You're able to access that technology, and you're able to be able to implement things without really high skilled developers. And we're able to do that, and have that immediate ROI and cost savings. So I think there's a lot of opportunity while we're in this downturn to take a look and do that technology rationalization. Look at what you have, how you're using it. Should it be on-prem? Should it go to cloud? Can I automate some of those processes? Can I rip and replace some of that technology with cloud, with Azure Blob Storage? What are those collaboration tools that we need to enable a remote workforce? I feel like there's a lot of opportunity there around that technology piece. While there's those other projects that are taking those immediate cost savings, such as asset management, if those are being implemented in parallel to you looking and rationalizing to the future, then that seems to be a really good approach of what we would recommend in this market over the next couple months.
Hey, absolutely, Kate. And I think going back to the polling as well, and look at how many people answered on the data warehousing analytics side, that renewed focus, or say additional focus on data and high quality data, is a major driver. Many customers are making plans to utilize cloud-based data warehouses and tools that utilize that low-cost storage that we mentioned, allow scalability, and really that pay-as-you-go strategy to reduce long-term storage and compute cost. I think Snowflake and Azure are both gaining a lot of traction in the market across the oil and gas landscape right now. Many times, absolutely. And many times having an environment set up for users to consume information can also drastically reduce that licensing on those source systems, which tends to be very expensive, where they're utilizing those source systems for reporting needs only. And to add to that as well, I think the other trend that we really see across the board, and Kate and Leo both mentioned this, but really is managed services and allowing companies to lower the cost of business and IT functions with the ability to scale up and down as.
Yeah, I think the theme is scale, right? Scale up and down, scale your technology, scale your people, scale your assets, right? And all of that, the scale is that's where you're able to really get those cost savings in.
Rapidly and efficiently. Yeah.
Great.
Any questions?
Yeah, is there any questions at all? And Leo, I didn't know if you wanted to add any additional thoughts there too before we summarize a bit, but anybody feel free to jump in with questions too.
The only thing I'll add that I think is interesting that, for example, a current project, and talking to BJ's topic around being able to report on data and the data, and I spent a bit of time talking about spend analytics, is that a lot of times the spend data that operators receive are then categorized by an accounting structure. And oftentimes we're finding that that's not a granular enough structure to be able to make good business decisions. And so we're finding more and more operators recognizing we're trying to find ways to be able to standardize some level of information so that they can get visibility to it, and then creating some sort of dashboarding, reporting around it as well, so they can easily manage their business and get access to that information quickly, and using very cost-effective tools. I mean, I think most of us here probably on the line have experienced using things like Power BI versus Spotfire, where Spotfire was used for a long time. But again, trying to rationalize, is it good enough? Can you get what you need? And then getting to the base data, leveraging systems you have. So very much, this is kind of the catalyst to get everyone starting to move to that way as quickly as possible.
It's a great point. Any thoughts or questions?
It's Mike again with Lewis. I personally struggle with the timely reporting of spend. Too much of a lag, understanding what was done and how much it cost. What systems or processes do other operators, or what you might suggest to improve upon that?
Yeah, so as I was mentioning, there's a current project we're working on, which is something that I undertook in other companies, but it's something that in an environment where you had a CapEx budget, it's sometimes hard to get to, but when you're really trying to manage your costs, it's important to do this. The variation, like you said, there's a lot of detail out there in the line item detail of invoices, but you have to spend the time to try to group those things to understand if you can standardize to particular types of jobs and particular types of codes. And so what we're developing is a level of hierarchy coding that helps so that you can integrate that into that price book system, into invoices coming in. And every invoice that comes in that gets automatically coded to those codes. And that way it's much easier for the business or supply chain to also pull those reports, analyze the data. It could be from 10 different companies that call the same service something a little bit different. That's already now been standardized. And then you can start diving into those opportunities much more easily so you can take action. We've heard over and over again, 90+% of the time, supply chain has been trying to analyze the data instead of capitalizing and taking action on it. And so this project will enable them to take action because they'll have that information readily available in a more standardized format, and the content as well has been kind of quality controlled through every line item is coded to a specific code that can then be, again, grouped and sliced and diced any which way you want to look at it. So you could see, for example, fuel surcharges across the entire enterprise or housing charges across the entire enterprise. Sometimes they're hidden. And in the process of doing this project, we found several opportunities where operations had no idea that they were spending money in certain areas because they were hidden into a much bigger general ledger account. So it doesn't take a lot of, technology investment, a lot of time even to go through this project. But the importance and the value they're going to get out of it immediately is going to be extremely powerful. And this was a project with a duration of about 6 weeks, looking at one particular segment of their business. So that, they'll move through the next phases, but in less than 6 months, they'll have all this coded with historical information. And then moving forward, they'll be able to get that data in that format and take action on it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Mike, you might realize, you already have the tools, at Lewis that you need to do it. It's just a matter of changing how you're categorizing it and the processes around tracking those costs and entering those costs. You might be able to make a lot of changes and then put some visibility on top of it with Power BI. And you'd be surprised at how quickly you'd be able to get to those answers.
No, okay.
Any other questions or comments? I do want to throw up kind of a summary slide here, but we are still here to continue on with any further conversation about what we've talked about or any of these items. But in summary, really, we're finding the companies are looking to reduce that LOE and G&A, and some of the most common routes are asset management, spend visibility and analysis, automation, migration to cloud and SaaS environments, and outsourcing managed services, and also that technology optimization and rationalization. Any additional questions or comments?
I know we were over time and it was slated for half an hour, and really appreciate everybody hanging on continue to participate in the discussion. And again, as Amy mentioned, we're open if you want to continue the discussion or have any additional questions.
Hey, this is Travis from Crestone. I'm just wondering, right now, are people not wanting to make changes, like let's say from Spotfire to Power BI because everyone's working from home? And just that change is going to be difficult with everybody working remote?
BJ, do you want to take that one? We lost BJ. Yeah, so Travis, I can take that one. I think there are definitely, I think short term, no. I don't think people want to make those type of changes right now. But as they go into second half, it's something that they should look at as part of that technology rationalization. I would say look at the cost benefit of doing that now, so that when people are starting to go back into the office and you're looking at your second half projects and there's a really good cost benefit analysis done on that and that you see that ROI, that might be something to consider. But I think it would be hard to make that flip right now while people are remote. But it could help you long term to look at those and compare and contrast those technologies.
And I would agree with that, Kate. I think back to the previous point and looking at how much change we've currently, undergone over the last 3 months. Right now is the time to evaluate that and really look at how ingrained some of those other tools are versus training on a new tool. So consideration as you move forward as well.
Yeah, if you have Spotfire ingrained in every single one of your reports, it's going to be expensive to replace, right? But if it's there minimally and it's a high cost and those reports can be replaced by Power BI, then I think it's worth taking a look.
And just kind of where my head's at, and this is probably not the right way of doing it, but I'm trying to limit change because changes every day and we don't know when we're going back to the office, and that it's like everything else is changing. So if I want to limit change, and then my ROI has to be super short.
Yep.
So I got very, tactical versus strategic. And so I'm kind of caught in this weird, environment that I don't feel like I have a whole lot of levers to pull right now, even though cost is super important. But I can't spend money to save money next year. This is going to be a hard sell.
Yeah. And sometimes it may be that you do have to break up those projects. I think it was Kate that mentioned that before. You start, maybe can't do the wholesale change, but you do it in areas, right? And maybe ones that may not have as big of impact, but you can start testing those changes and then if it proves out that ROI, then it's much easier to then start letting that migrate through to phase to the next set of users. And so I think in this environment, it's always the case. You're right. It's hard to spend money to save money, even though it saves money long term. But if you are able to kind of fractionalize that process or phase it into those types of programs, then it may be a way of approaching some of those changes more gradually.
And if you know the direction you want to go as well, Travis, for example, if you really want to push like spend analytics to those supply chain and accounting folks, then you can make the decision long term, we want to move to Power BI, for example, and roll that out to that group individually, as opposed to using whatever tools in place, knowing that you may change it later. That's actually going to reduce that long term change management, as well as the amount of change for those departments.
Well, that makes sense. Thank you.
Great question. Great conversation there. Any other questions or comments? All right, I'm going to thank everybody for attending. Really appreciate it. Appreciate the time. Know we went over a little bit, but I think it was a great conversation, and thanks for hanging on here with us. We will make the recording available, so we'll send out a link to that. And then we'll also let you know of upcoming events that we'll be having. And if anybody has a specific topic that they'd like us to cover in the future, please do not hesitate to send that to any one of us. And we'll make sure that we focus in on those topics next time. So again, thanks everybody. Have a great day and stay safe. Thanks.
Thanks
for your time,
everyone.
everybody. Thanks.
Good to see you.